Hello everyone, today we're going to have someone talk to us about physics. So we've got some person on the show today and they're just going to be discussing their opinion on physics itself and how we can change the way we view physics to benefit the way that we do physics everywhere. So blow us away, mate.
So the actual word physics itself comes from the Greek word for nature, so physis. Physics is all about trying to understand the world around us by theorizing and coming up with ideas to help explain it. Okay, here's an obvious example of where a physics concept doesn't perfectly, but roughly, models a natural phenomenon that we see. So we have invented the idea of a sphere in order to describe things we see around us that are roughly spherical, like the Earth or all planets really. The thing is that spheres don't actually exist in the real world. Spheres roughly exist, but even the Earth has little mountains. Now, this doesn't just go for shapes. There is no concept, literally no concept, that can be perfectly found in the natural world. And that's the thing that we have to realize. Physics can be sometimes taken out of context. The second law of thermodynamics states that as time goes by, things in an isolated system go from being in order to being in chaos. And okay, you can see that quite clearly if you have a messy room. If you don't clean it for a while, it descends into chaos. But chaos itself is certainly not an inherent property of the universe, but instead an inherent property of our minds. We have opinions about what chaos is. Chaos is things that we find harder to understand. But how can you have such a rigid physics law that describes how chaos exists more and more over time in an isolated system, when what chaos really is our opinion of things? So as time goes by, the second law of thermodynamics is really saying, as time goes by, we find things harder to understand. That shows that physics laws can't be taken too literally. Another thing is the formula, mgh, mass times gravity times height. This is a formula that can be applied to get gravitational potential energy. The thing about this formula is that it doesn't necessarily take into account the fact that as you have an object further and further away from a planet, the pulling that the planet has on the object and the object has on the planet becomes less and less strong. And when we try to perfectly describe the universe that we see at the fundamental level, we stuff up. We get slapped in the face from physics because we get into the realm of quantum mechanics and stuff gets really weird there. In the quantum world, some particles have to, I'm very vague on this topic by the way, but some particles have to spin around twice in order to get into their original position. So you can imagine me spinning around once, yep, original position, but imagine I'm a particle at the very tiny level. I have to spin around twice before I'm the same thing again. Another part of quantum physics is time goes backwards, things can be in two places at once, entanglement between particles, electrons, it all gets really weird. And that's a huge shock to us, quantum mechanics, the whole weirdness of it, because we're so used to being able to describe the way that the universe is in really rigid, easy to understand, building block ways. And that's not how it is. Classical physics just falls down when you try to explain things on the small level. General relativity, the entanglement of time and space is incredibly just weird and unintuitive, and it's very hard to wrap your head around. We can't attach ourselves too clearly to, or too rigidly, too addictively to any ideas, because they're all just tools. We use all sorts of tools physics tools and mathematical tools to try and explain the world around us. We invent these things. It's not really the way that the universe is. If you analyse maths or physics, it's more analysing the way that our brains work, the way that our brains like to label things. Normal, natural numbers like 2, 3, 4, they're much easier to understand, much easier to visualize, because we're used to visualizing and we're used to understanding those sorts of things much more often. But it doesn't make them any more real. Just because we can visualize and see them in our minds much more clearly and easily doesn't mean that the number 5 is any more real than the square root of -1, because the square root of -1 has applications in electricity, and electricity is a thing. Physics and maths concepts are used to roughly explain what we see, but not a single one of them perfectly describe what we see. In the same way, we try to use all thought, every sort of thought that you might have, such as broccoli is bad. Firstly, broccoli isn't necessarily bad at all. It's actually quite good for you. But then again, it's nothing at all. Broccoli is nor good or bad. It doesn't have an inherent quality. The universe doesn't impose on broccoli saying that, broccoli, you're not a good thing. And it's primitive to still think that you can apply your personal opinions onto anything and say that that is correct, 100% correct in every way. It's only an idea that can be of use to us. And that's all every thought really is. It's necessary to know that all the bunch of thoughts and biases and opinions and formulas that you have, and the way that the world, the universe really exists, are completely two separate things. And we can't get too lost in this world. People just getting into maths and physics think that, oh, I'm never going to be able to become a great mathematician or physicist because there is simply too much information for me to absorb. There's an infinite amount of ideas that you can apply in order to understand the universe. But in reality, it's all one big, soupy, energetic mush. It's not really anything. The idea that you shouldn't look at a camera while you're being filmed, or that you shouldn't pick your nose while you're being filmed, those two ideas are just attachments that we have. And the moment that we detach ourselves to these useless ideas and we realize that there's no right way to be filmed, is the moment that we actually free ourselves intellectually and even emotionally and are able to achieve things in new and creative ways instead of shunning new ideas, cutting out things because they seem silly. Just because it seems silly doesn't mean that it's a bad idea. Quantum physics is pretty silly, but it's probably the most accurate description of the way that the universe truly exists that we have so far. So let go, absolutely let go of all the biases and ways that you think that physics, nature, so I'm still talking about nature, that's the benefit of speaking about physics, because nature is pretty much everything, so you can get away with talking about emotions when you're trying to speak about physics for a Khan Academy video. If this sort of concept is understood by everyone, into intellectual creativity and freedom and enjoyment, it'll just increase lots. Oh, and there's another idea. Watch the way that your mind and thoughts work. If you have convinced yourself that every one of your thoughts, formulas, opinions are instantly correct the minute that you create them, you miss the hundreds of other ways that you could potentially see the world. This is an incredibly useful thing for everyone to be able to be aware of. Oh! Thank you so much for being on the show. I've really appreciated and listened very intently to everything you've had to say. You've been very profound and just absolutely perfect in every way. So thank you so much for being on the show. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.